Jesus in My Life, episode 18.
And basically he tells me that he's like, yeah, this is spiritual warfare, man. He's like, this is an attack of the enemy. And I'm like, how are you guys getting through this? And he's like, our faith in Jesus. And I'm like, how can you guys have faith in Jesus through this? Like, why doesn't he just like let it stop?
Welcome to Jesus in My Life, a podcast with Rob and Jack, where we interview everyday people like me and you about their extraordinary experiences with our Savior, Jesus Christ.
Welcome to a new episode of Jesus in My Life podcast. We're so glad that you're with us. My name is Rob and my teammate Jack. And today we're going to get right to it. And I'm really excited about introducing to our listeners. Our guest in studio today is Justin. And Justin is someone that I've known since I think it was probably since he was a freshman in high school.
Yeah.
Was when I first met Justin. And Justin is now a senior. That's correct? Yeah.
Correct, yeah.
A senior at Point Loma University. And so, Justin, welcome to Jesus in My Life podcast.
Thank you for having me. Glad to be on.
Awesome. Well, Justin, why don't we just go ahead and hit it right from the get-go? And it would be kind of cool for you to share, your story, kind of give a Reader's Digest version of your journey with Christ.
Yeah, absolutely. So my family grew up going to Living Water. They were part of the original branch off. I kind of went to church with them on weekends and whatnot as a kid, but just wasn't, super invested in it. Didn't, I would rather have stayed home and played with my toys and whatnot. I didn't really understand the purpose of church. And then as I grew older, just continued that kind of thought process of I don't want to be going and using my Sunday mornings and stuff like that when I could just be sleeping in and, Sunday school. I was like, it's another day of school kind of thing. So just had a bad attitude towards church my whole, young childhood into the early teens years. And as I got a little older, probably around the age of 12, my parents allowed me to stay home and told me okay, you can have the choice, you're old enough to stay home by yourself. If you really don't want to come, we're not going to force you kind of thing. So I chose to stay home, take my Sunday morning, sleep in, stuff like that. And then I got into high school and my parents really just encouraged me to go to youth group. They're like, if you don't want to go for the Christian aspect, you don't want to listen to all that stuff, that's okay. Just go for the social aspect. Cause I was a very social person, very just outgoing, always wanting to make new friends. And so, I was like, all right, fine. I'll try it out. And I went, my freshman year, about halfway through the first semester, I decided to start showing up. Just would go and hang out, have fun with people, play games, all that stuff. And then, when it came time for the message, I just kind of sat in the back and sit on my phone, pay attention to whatever baseball games we're playing or whatever, just sitting on the beanbag in the back of the room, just kind of minding my own business. And then kind of did that my freshman and sophomore year, and most of my junior year, or the first half of my junior year. And then I actually ended up tearing my UCL in my elbow my junior year of high school playing baseball, and ended up having surgery on that. And so I was out for a long period of time and just kind of really felt lost. Didn't really know what to do because my whole identity was in baseball. That was all I did. And so just kind of started coming to youth group still. And just now I was, looking for something because my time wasn't always spent playing baseball. I was just kind of what am I doing with my life? Just kind of started evaluating stuff. And around this time is when I kind of started paying a little bit more attention because I started just looking for answers for things that I didn't have the answer for, and just kind of started listening a little bit more, paying attention, and then started having just more questions just about, this whole Jesus thing, just what is that? What does that look like? Everybody's here. That's when I kind of started realizing people were coming here for that, not for the social aspect. And I was just kind of confused by it. Why is everybody coming for this? What's so great about it? So kind of just started asking more questions, talking to people. And then we were through a time, it was April of my junior year. So that would be 2018. We ended up having a break in time where we didn't have a specific youth pastor. And so we were just having, kind of people come in, guest speak, all this stuff. Rob, by that point, you were now the head pastor of the church. And so, you were helping out a lot, but, it was a lot for you to take on both roles. And so we just had guest speakers coming in and stuff like that. And it was very, this student led kind of thing was kind of what you guys were pushing. That was kind of where I started trying to find a role in. I started like playing more of the role, being one of the older people in the youth group, just kind of started like seeing like the chaos that was going on of like, nobody really knew what was happening. And so I just kind of started playing a larger role. And then that was when Charlotte's dad, who was the youth pastor of a church down the street, came in and was going to give a message that day. And that day, just from the beginning, I can still remember it. Like everything just kind of felt a little weird. We were, as a youth group, just very unfocused. We were during worship. Everybody was just kind of not paying attention to what was going on, just having side conversation. His little like youth worship band was there for the youth group at his church, and they were doing worship. And yeah, just as a whole, we were very unfocused, not paying attention to it. And he was kind of standing in the back and was observing. And then when it came time for him to give his message, he gets up on the stage and he's like, you know what? Like I had a whole message planned to give for you guys, but just after observing that, like you guys just didn't seem like focused. And he's like, I really feel like God is putting this on my heart that I need to share this. And he's like, and I don't like sharing it because every time I share it, things get worse. And that's when I kind of just stopped in my tracks and was just like, what is this guy kind of talking about? Like, what do you mean? So from there, he kind of started giving his message about his daughter, who at the time, I want to say she was like 12. I can't remember exactly, but I think she was like 12. And she starts telling us a story about how, she starts experiencing these odd times where she would just kind of like freak out a little bit and start freaking out. And they thought that at first it was just it wasn't happening and, often enough for them to like think anything of it at first. And so it would be like once every, month or so, or every couple months. And then over time, it just kind of slowly, gradually, she would freak out a little bit more. And eventually they realized is that she was experiencing like heavy demonic attacks. They were just coming and, jumping out at her and just like sitting in the side of her room and stuff like that. And when I first heard that, I was like, okay, that's a load of crap. Like that's not, okay, whatever, sure, and then he kind of just starts going into more detail about, how she would how they would combat this. They set up a war room in her closet where she would sit there and like draw the figures and like basically pin them on her wall and just, pray them away kind of thing. And like she'd sit in her closet and just pray these figures away. And, and those attacks just continued to happen more and more periodically, where it would be happening, 3-4 times a day. And like they had to alter their life. They had to like take different routes home because trees were hanging over the road. And, these demonic figures would just climb out of the trees and into the car, and they'd be driving, and all of a sudden she'd just start screaming her head off. And to me, like he starts describing what these figures would look like based off of her drawings. And I just got such a real picture of what those might look like. And that to me was like, okay, this can't be made up stuff. Like this, you can't just be like so aware of what these figures look like and be making this up, right? And it wasn't just like one figure that he would describe. It was just figure after figure after figure after figure. And so to me, I'm like kind of sitting there, my jaw is just kind of just opening as I'm sitting in that chair. I was sitting in the very front. I remember exactly what chair I was sitting at, and just kind of sitting there, just leaning forward, just my jaw just kind of dropping open as I'm just like, what in the heck is happening? Like, is this is seriously real? And I just kind of got that realization that it was real.
Hey, Justin, let me ask you this question. What was it specifically? Because you said when you first started hearing her story and very quickly you concluded, well, this is a load of crap. Mm-hmm. What shifted in your thinking? What got your attention? What moved your posture, like literally at the edge of your seat at this point?
It was the description of those figures. It was like up until that point, I was like, this can't be real. And then heard the description of like what these demonic figures were looking like, and the variety, like the detail in their face, the detail in the eyes that they were saying, like it was just like they would describe that like they had a chin and a nose, and like the eyes were just completely black, and they would have like these crazy things coming off of their head, or just all these random things. But just like I was able to just get from his description such a detailed look of what it would look like an image in my head, and I was like, man, that's heavy. That's real,
What's interesting, Justin, in this, and I think what would be helpful to our audience to realize is that me and Rob know Matt, who's the pastor who was sharing the story with you guys, right? And it's interesting about him, and we really should get him on the show someday because his story is pretty amazing. But he was, didn't really believe that demonic attacks like this could actually even happen in the modern world. He thought that was reserved for, the Old Testament, the New Testament time period, and that kind of thing doesn't happen anymore, is really where he came from. So at first, they totally didn't want to believe that what his daughter was experiencing was actually spiritual warfare, spiritual demonic oppression. And so, he also had to come to the conclusion with everything that was manifesting, all the things that were happening, that this was not just something she was losing her mind. This was something she was actually experiencing. And there's, obviously a light at the end of the tunnel, and everybody's probably curious about what happened with her, but we're going to save that story for another time. So Justin, you're at this point where you realize I'm assuming the amount of detail he was sharing and the way that he was, this couldn't be made up.
Yeah. So by that point, I just was like, okay, this is real, and just kind of felt this weight just kind of come on my heart. And by the time he finishes up, keep in mind, this is a 12-year-old girl, and I'm sitting here, I'm like, man, this is happening to a 12-year-old. Like, what has this girl done to deserve this? Right? Like, she's a 12-year-old girl. Like, she didn't deserve this. And so as he's finishing up, he's sitting there and he's like, well, like, if any of you like have any more questions or anything like that, like, I'm going to be in the back, and you guys can come back and ask me some questions and talk. And I'd love to talk to you guys about it. And I'm kind of just sitting in my chair, just thinking like, man, like, I want to go back there and talk, but like, that's going to like force me to go and like face this and like understand, like really admit to people that it's real, And so I'm kind of contemplating in my head. I'm like, do I want to do that? Do I want to take that step? And I know what that's going to entail. And eventually I just like, it probably felt like to me like 5 minutes, but it was really honestly only, 10 seconds. And get up and turn around and go walk back to him. I start asking him questions, just kind of like, man, like, I'd love to hear more. Like, I'm so intrigued. I don't understand. Like, please explain to me what's going on. And basically he tells me that he's like, yeah, this is spiritual warfare, man. He's like, this is an attack of the enemy. And I'm like, how are you guys getting through this? And he's like, our faith in Jesus. And I'm like, how can you guys have faith in Jesus through this? Like, why doesn't he just like let it stop? Like, why doesn't he just make it stop? Like, I don't understand. Like, if he's so good, and he's like, that's the question that we've been asking. We don't necessarily know. He's like, and that's our faith in him is because he has a plan for it. And we're just kind of waiting for that plan to kind of reveal itself. And little did I know that plan was revealing itself right there in front of our eyes. And, and I was just like, well, like, if there's something that's evil in this world, like, man, I just have to believe that there's something that counters that. That's that light, that can, protect us from that. And he's like, so I just got to ask, do you want to give your life over to Jesus then? And in that moment, just like without any hesitation, I was just like, yes, like, I want to be on the side that doesn't have this, right? Like, I don't want to be a part of this. I want to do everything in my power to make sure that this doesn't happen to me, right? And like, which is kind of a little bit odd hearing that, like, I'm in a situation where I'm hearing that this is happening to someone who's a follower of Jesus, but I just still felt this strong conviction. I was like, I need to be on this side. And I later found out that he, like, as he was walking back, he kind of got an image that there was somebody kind of like, there was like this cloud and somebody was like really trying to turn around, and that there was his hand kind of pulling me back. And it was the hand of like the devil trying to pull me back and not let me turn around to go towards him. And the second he turned around from walking to the back of the church, I'm standing right there. And that to me, like, really hit me super hard, because I was like, man, like, God's plan was for me to go ask him those questions, and to, Charlotte was experiencing these attacks for the reason that he wanted to save me, and Charlotte's faith was strong enough to the point where she could have like gone through these attacks and it wouldn't have shaken her faith. It didn't take her away from Jesus. And I'm sure if you guys have him on later, like, he'll tell you those attacks stopped after I became and like gave my life to Christ. And it was shortly after that, and it was not, I think, days after that, she doesn't experience any more attacks, which is crazy that she's going through all of this just to bring me into the kingdom of God. And that to me, like, when I found that out, was so powerful, that he knew Charlotte's strength and faith, and therefore knew that she could endure those attacks just to bring me into this kingdom. But yeah, that's the gist of that story of how that happened.
Justin, I don't know if you know this part of the story, but I've had an opportunity to kind of talk to Matt about it. Do you know that when you were sitting there looking back, thinking, should I go talk to Matt? Did you know that Charlotte at that moment ran, like it was literally at that moment, because they verified it through text message, that because Matt stayed really long. His wife was like, where are you at? Why haven't you returned home yet? Because you guys went really late that night. And during one of those she was writing that text message, Charlotte ran to her and said, Mom, we need to pray right now. There's somebody that God wants to draw to him, but the enemy's like holding him back. Like, we need to pray right now, Mom.
Yeah.
And so when Matt got home and they talked it all through, he was like, when Charlotte did that, that's when you were turning around and coming, right? Like, so they had, Charlotte and her mom had stopped and prayed, and so it's just like incredible how God orchestrated all of this, allowed it to happen. It's crazy, man.
Yeah.
It's such a cool story.
Yeah. I had found that part out later, same time that I had found out that Matt was seeing that vision of, somebody holding me back, trying to not let me turn around. At that same point, that when I found out about that, I also found out that Charlotte and her mom had been praying and were worried about him and realized that something's happening, like somebody is giving their life to Jesus and we need to pray for him, which is so powerful to hear.
Wow, what an awakening in many ways, Justin. And I was there firsthand. I got to experience all that Justin has shared here, and I was there in that room. I saw Justin after he gave his life to Christ, and we went to it must have been like 11 o'clock at night. And man, you were as wide as awake as anything, and it was a new life right there immediately. And just as I think back to that, man, like, I know that your life has never been the same. And so share with our listeners, like, some of the things that happened right after that. And, Chris, this was, I think you're going into your last few years of high school now, after you surrendered your life to Christ. And so why don't you kind of share what were some of the things that happened after this situation?
Yeah. So directly after, I go home and I'm wide awake, like you said, and I just start reading the Bible. And, I read like probably 2 books that night. But so that's directly after. But my life, the trajectory of the path of my life just completely changed. Just took a hard right turn right then and there. At that point in my life, I was considering, I'm like, okay, I'm either going to go play baseball somewhere, I'm going to get a scholarship to college and go play, or I'm going to enlist in the Army. Those were my options at that point. Because I didn't want to go to school for school. I wanted to go to school to either play baseball or I wanted to go get into the military. Come my senior year of high school, which is, because this happened in like May, late April, early May. And so our junior year was over with end of May, middle of May. So I was going into my senior year. And so it was time to apply for colleges. And that's when a friend of mine, Paige, who went to that youth group, had just gotten back on a trip with McKenna from going and touring colleges down in Southern California, and told me about Point Loma. And she's like, you have to go check it out. Like, it's beautiful down there. Like, you just give it a shot. And I was just kind of like, at that point, I was still like, I don't know, but we went down and checked it out and just absolutely fell in love with the campus, and still didn't know what I wanted to do with my life at that point. So I was just like, okay, like, I can go to Point Loma, but I'm just like, it's a private school. It's more expensive. I don't know what I'm going to study, all this stuff. And I was like, and if I go to college, like, what's my career going to look like? Like, I don't know what I'm going to do after college, all this stuff. And so I'm just praying and praying and praying. And one day I'm just sitting in my room. And this is like 3 days before I have to accept where I'm going to school, because the deadline's like at this point. And I'm just praying, like, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And all of a sudden, like, eventually I'm just playing video games in my room, and I just kind of have to sit back in my chair. And I'm like, holy smokes. Like, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to Point Loma. I'm going to study political science, and then I'm going to be a cop when I graduate. And it just all came to me in just like a split second. And I ran downstairs, and my mom's sitting on her computer doing work. I think she was honestly on a work call. And I was like, Mom, like you got to get off this call. I know what I'm doing. I'm like, I'm like, you got to just mute yourself. I got to tell you what I'm doing in my life, And from there, now I'm at this Christian school, surrounded by other people who are, pursuing God. And, I've had my ups and downs at the school and whatnot, but ultimately my life has completely taken a right turn towards Jesus and just continued to climb that way, companionship and fellowship with other people and walking with other people in a way that I just never would have thought my life would have gone, in a trajectory and a path that only God had set out for me.
Right on. So like you mentioned earlier that baseball was your thing, right?
Absolutely.
And you started playing baseball at Point Loma, didn't you?
Yeah. So once I decided I wanted to go to Point Loma, I was like, okay, well, I still love baseball, so I want to play. But because of my injury and stuff like that, like I didn't have any offers anywhere because I was out for all my junior year, half my senior year. So I was like, okay, I'm going to go to Point Loma. And I just tried that entire summer to just go to everything that they had there, baseball wise, to get noticed by the coach. And eventually I found out like the week before I was leaving that he wanted to give me a spot on the team. It wasn't going to be any kind of scholarship spot or anything. It was just like, hey, you got a spot. I was like, awesome, because I was going there either way. So I started playing baseball, and that was actually how I got plugged into the first ministry that I was a part of at Point Loma, called Campus Outreach, which is actually a nationwide program that's on college campuses all across the nation. And got plugged in from one of the grad students who was on that team. He kind of introduced me. I remember the first time I met him, he came up to me. He's like, "Hi, I'm Travis Takata. Like, are you a Christian? Do you believe in Jesus?" Like, that was the first thing. He didn't even ask my name. Just was just like, "Are you a Christian? Like, do you believe in Jesus?" And I was just like, "Yeah, I do." And he's like, "Great, you're coming with me tomorrow night to Campus Outreach." And, as a freshman, like I'm sitting there and like, there's this guy who's 22 years old. And he's like, "You're coming with me." And so I'm like, "Oh, okay." Went with him, and he became like a quick mentor of mine who was immediately, I was spending my time around him, asking him questions, because just that culture with baseball, it gets its rep and its rap for a reason, because a lot of those, like stereotypes and whatnot are true. Baseball loves to party, loves to drink, loves to, all that stuff. So I was immediately like, you know what, I don't want to be a part of that. I'm going to be a part of Travis and like follow this guy and help use him to kind of help me steer clear. And it worked. But then eventually just baseball was just too much of a time commitment there. I had no freedom. I like went to Point Loma for a bunch of reasons, because it was a Christian school. Didn't have time to really get plugged into a whole lot of community things there. So I ended up actually stepping away from baseball, which was the first large decision that I had made since I had become a Christian that was really focused on God, because God was making this huge, I was just getting this huge call from God saying like, "Hey, look, like it's time for you to step away. Like I had you on this baseball team so you could get plugged in with Campus Outreach," because I wouldn't have ever been plugged in if it wasn't for Travis on the baseball team. So like that was kind of what God was using as my door to get in. And from there, my journey with Campus Outreach just kind of took off. Yeah. So like baseball was a very short period of my time there at Loma, but was a huge stepping stone for my journey and walk with Christ while I'm in college.
Hey, Justin, I've been wanting to ask this question. Your decision, your awakening, I'll call it your awakening, and then your decision to surrender to Christ, what did this do to your home? Like what did this do for your family specifically?
Yeah. So as I had mentioned, my parents, had always been going to church. They'd been going to church their whole life, but just kind of were there. They weren't, super involved in the church. They weren't, taking on all these things. And then my brother and sister, kind of similar to me, just kind of going to youth group. At the time, my brother wasn't actually going. It was just my sister. My brother's 4 years younger than me. So as he started going to youth group after I had graduated from high school. But my decision to follow Christ then led to my sister's decision to follow Christ. And this was her decision was very shortly after, like I'm talking like days or weeks after. And then I think it was like a year later was when my brother decided. I want to say it was my 2019 during that COVID pandemic when we weren't able to go to Hume, and we went to, I forget what that
Dodasa Ranch.
Dodasa Ranch. That's what it was. Yeah. We went there, And that was kind of when my brother had been going to youth group and like hearing all this stuff, but like hadn't like fully made the decision to be like, and like publicly say like, I want to follow God, and that was when he decided to do that. And being that like all of us kids had started, down this path, my parents were just like, man, like we got to get more involved now too. And so they started taking on all these things with the church, getting plugged in, getting more involved with the community groups. And now they're leading an alpha group at that church. My dad is part of the men's ministry. I believe he's heading it, from what I've heard. And so it's just our whole family has just completely leaned in and plugged in, just from God using me to, bring my whole family solidly into the church.
Wow.
I love it. Justin, what would you say as we wrap up our time together? What would you say to someone who was in your shoes your sophomore year, where you've been going to church, but you don't really see the point of it? It's nice social club. People are nice. You do fun stuff. People, all of that. But the that spirit-filled life is lacking from their life. What would you say to them?
I would say to them, ask questions. Sit down with somebody who seems like they know what they're talking about, and start just asking them questions. If they don't know the answer, they'll take you to somebody who does, right? Just ask them, like, why are you here? Like, what is so attractive to this about you, other than the social aspect, obviously, but like, why are you here? Because as soon as I started asking those questions, that was what led me down the path of, being more curious, paying more attention, and ultimately making that decision to follow Christ. So yeah, just ask questions. Find somebody who is leading a small group, or leading, whatever that format looks like in that youth group. Just ask somebody.
I love it. That's such great advice. It reminds me of the scripture, God is a rewarder of those who diligently seek him, right?
Yes.
And that includes asking genuine questions, right? Like you were curious, and really you took the step of, I want to know more. I'm going to go talk to Matt. And thinking about Charlotte, her demonic attacks and all of that stuff reminds me of, actually, all of this conversation reminds me of our foundation for this podcast. It comes from a story in Luke 8:39, where Jesus has delivered a man from demon possession. And this man wants to follow Jesus. And Jesus says to him, no, go back to your family and tell them everything God has done for you. So he went all through the town proclaiming the great things Jesus had done for him. And really, that's what we've done today, right? You just told everybody about how Jesus worked in your life. And that's the whole point, right? Like, sometimes people just need to hear how Jesus has interacted in your life to put church and the whole aspect of following Jesus to be a reality instead of just a theory or a theological idea. And so thank you for sharing your story, Justin, and our encouragement to our entire audience. The whole purpose for this podcast is to encourage them to go share with others what Jesus has done in their life. And if you don't know Jesus, really, go ask somebody who does follow him why they follow him.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks, Justin, so much.
Thank you guys for having me on.
Yeah. Have a blessed day, brother.
Yeah, you guys too.
We'll see all of you next week. And now a reflection on today's interview. So much could be said about this episode, so I'll try to keep it simple. Romans 8:28 says, and we know that all things God works for the good of those who love him, who are called according to his purpose. This relates to Charlotte's experience with tense spiritual warfare. God used what she went through to call a very specific person into his kingdom. But that wasn't the sole purpose of God allowing that to happen in Charlotte's life. There's so much more that's happened there. So much more than we can even understand. And when Charlotte stands before God, she will not regret what she went through, because God will have used it for good in her life and in the life of many other people. It goes back to what Joseph told his brothers in Genesis. What you meant for evil, God has used for good. And there has been so much good that has come out of this. As Justin shared, the impact went way beyond him. His entire family got super serious about their faith when their son became on fire for Jesus. So if you have parents or family members that are not walking with the Lord, sometimes the change in you is the catalyst that causes the change in them. We're all linked together more deeply, and we have more of an impact around our surroundings than we ever give ourselves credit for. So go be bold for Jesus and share Jesus' story in your life. We'll see you next week.
Thank you for listening to Jesus in My Life. New episodes release every Tuesday. Subscribe on your preferred podcasting platform so you don't miss a single episode. If you have enjoyed this podcast, please consider sharing this podcast with a friend or family member. If you would like to help our visibility online, consider rating us and posting a review on Apple Podcast. Have an awesome Jesus in My Life story? Contact us at jesusinmylifepodcast@gmail.com.